Tell us a bit about the work you've made for the Gypsy Maker project.
When I was first engaged to work with Gypsy Maker, I was travelling. So some of the materials I've collected from the travels, but I've also used historical pieces. Historical both in the fact that I've collected them. So this cloth here has come from work I did in India a few years ago. And the yellow base cloth was donated to me from a friend of mine, Alison, who runs a gallery, and it was a historical piece belonging to her family, a piece of Indian sari fabric. And I felt it was relevant with this particular piece, which talks about my great-grandparents, to think about how they tie back to India as a subcontinent, because that's where the Romanis came from. So it's much more directed to the whole family, if you like, of Romanis, not just to my family. In fact, we're all related. And so you can see that some of this is quite degraded and torn and damaged, but it's that fragility, as well as the fragility of the images. The images are broken, they're not perfect. For me, is a testament that we're frail beings, and our connection is gentle, if you like, and not always wholly tangible. There are breaks in my memories about where I connect to my own family. I haven't found much further back than my great-grandparents, but I'm still looking. So it's that connection to place. And again, with all three of these, there's a tea kettle. So it's coming back to the idea that the material itself and the imagery come together. So you have napkins, everyday cloth. So there's a piece of furnishing fabric with a rose. This piece is dedicated to my grandmother, and she's here. And my grandmother loved her roses. And roses were painted on caravans, but they were also on the canal barges, so another symbolic, roses and castles. So for me, they become symbolic. So that's the connection I have through the materials. I'm not certain I'm always conscious that I have a design in mind. I have an idea and then draw those elements together and start working around them. Rather like a painter will on the canvas, they'll start working on an idea and have sketchbooks to support that. And if it's not working, they'll scrub it out and rework. Well, I will tear a piece out and add a piece in. So it's not a very linear process, it's still very organic. Perhaps not as formulaic as most textiles can be, working up from the thread to the weave to construction, say, for example, for putting together a dress or a shirt, you would need to have a pattern. These are patternless. But perhaps that is me. I'm not able to be fixed. And I like to have that gentleness about where they sit, that there's this uncertainty. That somebody said that my work seems to float. It's just there. It's not anchored. It's not heavy. It's not tidied up around the edges like most textiles. It just is there.
Colour's clearly very important in your work. Can you talk about the way you've used colour in these three pieces? It strikes me that they're each loosely based around a kind of a primary colour, red, yellow, and blue. Was that a conscious thing, or did that kind of just sort of materialise?
I remember you making that comment last time we met, and it was through your eyes. I thought, actually, yes, I have the three primaries. I don't think it was conscious. I think it came through the materials because they reflect on three different stages of my becoming, if you like, my understanding of who I am. And so you have this one was dictated by the fact that the main substrate happened to be a piece of yellow sari fabric. And gold. I like the idea that it has that golden colour because Gran used to say that you wore your wealth on you because you had to take it with you. So it was there to be able to be traded. So anything with gold was treasured. Again, I've already talked about the roses, and red roses particularly are very symbolic. But I would see them all over my grandmother's house, and I like wild roses particularly. But it's amazing how much they play a part in everybody's culture. You give roses, you know, to your loved ones. Valentine's is just round the corner. What do you give? A rose. You don't give any other flower. There's something about its symbolic nature, particularly in our cultural history, that I like. And the fact I feel that you could almost smell this one. And then it's quite interesting that, move that along, that the last one, which has take in Japanese, they call that bamboo. Why this is the one with no figurative elements in it other than the tea kettle, no people. And that's perhaps me, that's where I started to become. I studied in Japan under a Churchill Fellowship early in my life. And this is where I began to understand what materials really could do, because in Japan, cloth and paper are not separated by hard lines. They're equally valid. And I studied paper making, and it's only as I studied paper I began to understand that in Japan it's also used as a textile as well. And I think that's where the world of the fine artist, if we're going to put labels out, that of the painter, if you like, person who works on paper and canvas, and the world of the textile artist began to merge. So this perhaps a symbol of my understanding of what materials mean to me, where I began to explore materials more thoroughly. So, yeah. Any other?
Yes, the photographic image seems to be quite important in the works you've made for the Gypsy Maker project. Is photography or because I noticed some of them aren't directly photographs, some of them are more kind of photograms, like the plant sections on the red piece in the middle, using a kind of a light sensitive material. How do you see the role of photography within your work?
That's an incredibly interesting question to ask, because I trained in photography as my secondary subject at art college, so you've picked that up. For me, figurative elements within my work, whether they're drawn or photographed, I like the juxtaposition they have with the less figurative elements, the more abstracted versions that come out with the way that the cloth is placed. Almost, particularly if I'm drawing an image, it's saying that I actually can draw. I'm not just working with cloth because I can't draw. Cause that was first raised as a question when I first worked with textiles, is, oh, what artists work with textiles because they cannot draw. And I thought, I'm not willing to accept that. But photography, I loved the work of Weston, who our appreciation of the great American West and landscape through his black and white imagery, when I first discovered them in my early 20s, blew my mind, and the seeming simplicity of those black and white forms, which were full of place. It could only have been the west coast of the USA, and using either direct photographic elements or traces of, as with photograms, which these are done with dyes, I think are about the way we record things. And we're doing it today, and we just don't have evidence of them, tangible evidence. They mostly exist on our PCs, but they're kind of like lost echoes of the past as well. So that's a reminder. I think it gives people a way into the work.
So Cass, just referring back to your interest in photography, can you talk about these smaller pieces that you've made for the Gypsy Maker project?
These started to evolve gradually as I was working on the larger pieces. I put a call out as well to family members to ask if they had any images of both immediate family, because I just wanted to relook at some images that I had on my PC in a different way. They're of their time. I'm always interested that the poses of this proud family beside their caravan and I think there might be an image in here as a drawing of my grandmother. But there we are, the poses of this proud family by the caravan is staged. Or, you know, people had to stand still, had to be staged. And they're like time shots of the past. And I was speaking to with my sister over the Christmas holidays, and she's trying to record some of these old images before they fade. And these too in time will fade. But as I look back on those images, I always want to ask my great-grandfather, what was his daily life like? Why is it you had, in one of the images, there was a beautifully laid out, there's always a beautifully laid out table with a china pot and cups and sandwiches, and they're in a caravan. So obviously china was very important to them. I think photography can speak to us as much as words, can tell us a great deal. And usually when I'm taking photographs of other people, either intentionally or unintentionally, I like to get them at work. I don't like them to pose. Unawares, I often sneak up and have a small camera when I'm travelling, so you get that relaxed pose. Because when I'm looking at people in a place, they gain a testament that they're tied to the landscape, to the place that they belong to, surrounded by the things that tell their story in a way that sometimes, as I said before, words can't.
And what are these pieces of fabric that you've used?
Most of these, there's a series of 5 here. I'll take this one up, which has got my grandmother on there. It's my father's writing, where he's writing about the background. And this is a photograph I'd taken of my grandmother in my early 20s when I did that photograph. And the background cloth are some pieces that were given to me by my aunt, and they're napkins. So it just seemed right that again, that all of these images, apart from this one of my grandmother, came from that story of the tea time outside the caravan. So perhaps I'm tying back to it. I'm not always certain, and I don't think you have to be entirely clear about why you've produced a piece of work. For me, it's about asking questions, and that people can come to it with their own thoughts and tell their own stories. And when I engage with others as part of the project, I'm certain that other things will be revealed.
So Cass, how do you see your work developing from here?
Gypsy Maker 4 has given me a chance to reflect on my own heritage. And one of the things that becomes much more evident as I've been working through the project is where I'm placed today in today's political climate. I'm concerned about the nature of migration, refugees needing to flee other countries, recognising that my own family, both immediate heritage and also distant heritage, my great aunts and uncles, would have been related to some of those who fled Europe from the end of the 19th century right through to the Second World War, and have continued to need to move because of where they stand in the social stable of things. So one of the things I've been looking at is a project that I'm gently calling the Shipping Forecast. It's a working title, and for me it's meant to, when I'm travelling, its intention for me, it ties me back home. Listening to the BBC broadcast makes me feel secure and safe. However, I also listen to news programmes and have not been able to miss broadcasts about the lives that have been lost in the waters off Europe. 17,700 migrants have lost their lives since 2014, up to February 2019. And that is they are the ones we know about. And I feel moved to use my voice as an artist to echo what's happening now. I don't think I have any answers, but I want to make it feel very present. So my plan is to have an installation which will be on show in Antwerp in 2 years' time. I've been invited to exhibit there. And you will see several pieces that you can walk through that talk about weather and maps and the shipping forecast. But as you come back through, you will read words that have come from the ether of the radio, out of the newspaper, or I've heard while I've travelled, all talking about this issue that's been top of the agenda almost since Brexit has come forward. What voices do they have? I want to create a visual voice for them so that they're not unseen, that they can't be forgotten, and they should never be forgotten.
Thank you very much, Cass.